The gunshots echoing through Mineral Springs, Arizona territory, weren't what scared Tabitha Norwood. It was the silence that followed. She stood frozen behind the general store counter, her fingers trembling against the worn wood, waiting for her father's return. It was 1875, and at 20 years old, she'd witnessed enough frontier violence to know that silence rarely brought good news. "Miss Norwood," Sheriff Mills burst through the doorway, hat in hand. "Your pa, I'm sorry." The world tilted beneath her feet. Her father, the only family she had left after her mother died of tuberculosis 3 winters ago, was gone. Shot dead in a dispute over supplies with the Blackwell brothers, notorious for their violent tempers and deep pockets. Within days, the whispers started. Without her father, the store's debts would consume whatever meager savings they had. Tabitha stood alone at his grave, the Arizona sun beating down mercilessly, when she overheard Mrs. Porter's hushed voice. "Poor thing has no worth to anyone now. No family, no money, no prospects. Just a burden on the town." The words stung worse than the desert heat. Worth. As if a person could be measured like cattle or land. 3 weeks later, the bank foreclosed. Tabitha had nowhere to go, nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's silver locket around her neck. The town council gathered to determine her fate as though she were a stray horse that needed placement. Mayor Hutchins adjusted his spectacles. "The Blackwell brothers have offered to buy the store. As for the girl, perhaps she could work as a laundress at the hotel." "For what wages?" asked Mrs. Porter with a sniff. "She can barely keep accounts, let alone manage proper work." Judge Wilson nodded gravely. "We could send her east to her mother's cousin in Boston." "With what money?" countered the mayor. The conversation continued around her as if she weren't even present. Tabitha felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. These were people who'd known her all her life, who'd bought supplies from her father for years. Now they spoke of her as if she were nothing more than a problem to be solved. The saloon doors swung open, silencing the room. Yates Blackburn stood in the doorway, trail dust still clinging to his buckskin jacket. At 32, he owned the largest cattle ranch in the territory, the Diamond B, which stretched across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land. Unlike the Blackwell brothers, Yates had earned his fortune through hard work and fair dealings. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, found Tabitha immediately. "I heard there was a meeting about Miss Norwood's situation," he said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. Mayor Hutchins cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackburn, we were just discussing options for the girl. With her father gone and the store lost, she has no place here, no skills of real value. She has no worth to this community," Judge Wilson added bluntly. "We're merely trying to find the most practical solution." Yates's jaw tightened as he removed his hat. He'd known Thomas Norwood for years. A fair man, honest, and his daughter was cut from the same cloth, hardworking and kind, with a quiet dignity that few possessed. "No worth," Yates repeated, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. He looked directly at Tabitha, seeing the pain she tried to mask behind her amber eyes. "Miss Norwood is worth more than all my land." The room fell silent. Tabitha's eyes widened at his declaration. "I'll hire her as the schoolteacher for the Diamond B. My ranch hand's children need education, and Miss Norwood has always had a way with books." His gaze never left hers. "The position comes with room and board in my late mother's cottage on the property, and fair wages." Before anyone could respond, he turned to Tabitha. "That is, if you'd accept the position, Miss Norwood." Tabitha straightened her shoulders. This wasn't charity, it was an opportunity. And despite her grief, despite everything she'd lost, she wasn't broken yet. "I would be honored, Mr. Blackburn." And that was how Tabitha Norwood came to the Diamond B Ranch on a cool autumn morning, with nothing but a small carpet bag containing her few remaining possessions and her head held high, unaware that Yates Blackburn's impulsive offer would change both their lives forever. The journey from town to the Diamond B took nearly 3 hours by wagon. Tabitha sat beside Yates, the the wooden seat hard beneath her skirts. Neither spoke much. She was lost in thoughts of what lay ahead, and he seemed content with the silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or telling her the names of distant mountains that rose like sleeping giants against the horizon. "Just over that ridge," Yates finally said, gesturing with his chin. "That's Diamond B territory." As they crested the hill, Tabitha couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips. The ranch sprawled across the valley below, a collection of sturdy buildings surrounding the main house, which stood 2 stories tall with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Beyond the buildings, cattle dotted the grasslands, tiny dark specks against the golden landscape. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Yates glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. "Took 12 years to build it to what you see now. Started with just 20 acres and a dozen head of cattle when I was 20. You've accomplished a great deal, Mr. Blackburn." He made a non-committal sound in his throat. "Didn't do it alone. Had good men working alongside me." As they approached, Tabitha could see activity everywhere, ranch hands moving between corrals, smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney, a woman hanging laundry behind one of the smaller cabins. It was like a small town unto itself. Yates guided the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "Mrs. Caldwell runs the household," he explained, nodding toward a stout woman with silver-streaked hair who emerged onto the porch. "She'll help get you settled, Mr. Blackburn," the woman called, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've prepared the cottage as you asked." "Much obliged, Mrs. Caldwell. This is Miss Tabitha Norwood, our new schoolteacher." Mrs. Caldwell's kind face broke into a smile. "Welcome to Diamond B, Miss Norwood. We've been in sore need of someone to teach the little ones." "How many children are there?" Tabitha asked, accepting Yates's hand as he helped her down from the wagon. 12 at present," Mrs. Caldwell replied, "ages 5 to 13. Good children, though some are a bit wild from lack of proper schooling." Yates lifted Tabitha's carpetbag from the wagon. "I'll show Miss Norwood to the cottage. Could you have some supper sent over later? I imagine she's tired from the journey." "Of course. I made fresh bread this morning, and there's beef stew for tonight." Tabitha followed Yates past the main house, down a well-worn path that led to a small cottage nestled beneath 3 towering cottonwood trees. It was a simple structure, with a stone chimney and blue-painted shutters flanking the windows. "This was my mother's place after my father passed," Yates explained as he opened the door. "She preferred it to the big house in her later years." The interior was modest but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bedroom visible through a doorway, and shelves filled with books along one wall. Everything was clean and well-maintained, with fresh curtains at the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table. "It's perfect," Tabitha said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness evident in the preparation. Yates set her bag down. "The schoolhouse is about 5 minutes' walk that way." He pointed through the window. "It's not much, just a cabin we converted, but there are desks and a blackboard. Whatever supplies you need, just let Mrs. Caldwell know." "Mr. Blackburn," Tabitha began, turning to face him, "I want to thank you for what you did in town, for standing up for me." His expression softened slightly. "No one deserves to be spoken about that way, Miss Norwood. Especially not someone who's just lost their father." He cleared his throat. "I'll leave you to get settled. Classes can start whenever you feel ready." "I'll begin tomorrow," she said firmly. "There's no sense in waiting." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I thought you might say that." He moved toward the door. "Breakfast is at 6 in the cookhouse, but Mrs. Caldwell can bring yours here if you prefer." "I'll come to the cookhouse. If I'm to be part of this ranch, I should meet everyone properly." He nodded, seeming pleased with her answer. "Until tomorrow then, Miss Norwood." After he left, Tabitha sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to exhale fully for the first time since hearing the gunshots that had changed her life. She'd lost everything: her father, her home, her place in the community she'd known all her life. Yet somehow, impossibly, she'd been offered a new beginning, She unclasped her mother's locket from around her neck and opened it, revealing the small portraits of her parents inside. "I'll make you proud," she whispered to them. "I promise." As the sun began to set, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Tabitha unpacked her few belongings and prepared to face whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. The cookhouse was already bustling when Tabitha arrived the next morning. Ranch hands filled the long tables, the clatter of plates and mugs mixing with rough-hewn laughter and conversation. The room fell momentarily quiet as she entered, every head turning to assess the newcomer. "Miss Norwood," Mrs. Caldwell called from beside the large cast-iron stove. "Come, come. I've saved you a spot at the end table." Tabitha made her way through the room, acutely aware of the curious gazes following her. She nodded politely as she passed, her back straight, determined not to show any discomfort. The men nodded back respectfully, a few touching their hats in greeting. At the table she found Yates already seated, going over ledgers while he ate. He stood when she approached. "Good morning, Miss Norwood. Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you. The cottage is very comfortable." Mrs. Caldwell placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before her. "Eat up, dear." Teaching those youngsters requires strength. As Tabitha ate, Yates introduced her to the men at the table: his foreman, Miguel Santiago, the ranch doctor, Thomas Green, and the blacksmith, Frederick Cooper. "The children will be at the schoolhouse by 8, Miguel informed her, his accent hinting at his Mexican heritage. "My boys, they are excited. They talk of nothing else since Mr. Blackburn told us you were coming." "I hope I don't disappoint them," Tabitha said with a smile. "You won't," Yates said quietly, his confidence in her surprisingly reassuring. After breakfast, he walked her to the schoolhouse, pointing out various parts of the ranch along the way. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and distant mountains. "The men respect that you came down to the cookhouse," he said. "Many ladies would consider it beneath them to eat with ranch hands. I'm hardly in a position to put on airs, Mr. Blackburn. It's not about position, it's about character." His gaze was direct, "and you've shown plenty of that." The schoolhouse was indeed small, a single room with a pot-bellied stove in one corner, a dozen desks of varying sizes arranged in rows, and a blackboard mounted on the wall. Shelves held a modest collection of books, slates, and other supplies. "It's not much," Yates said, watching her reaction. Tabitha ran her fingers along one of the desks. "It has everything we need. The rest we can build together." He nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "I'll leave you to prepare. The children should be here soon." True to his word, within the hour, the schoolhouse was filled with the energy only children can bring. They ranged from shy little ones clinging to their mother's skirts to lanky boys on the cusp of adolescence trying to appear uninterested. Tabitha greeted each one, learning names and ages, getting a sense of their individual personalities. There was Miguel's son Diego, bright-eyed and quick to smile, the Cooper twins Sarah and Samuel with matching freckles splashed across their noses, Hannah Green, the doctor's serious daughter who clutched a book of poetry, and 8 others, each unique in their own way. "Miss Norwood," said a small voice as the parents began to leave. It belonged to Lucy, the youngest at 5 years old, daughter of one of the ranch hands. "Are you going to stay forever?" Tabitha knelt to the child's level. "I'm going to stay as long as you all need me to teach you." This seemed to satisfy Lucy, who nodded solemnly before skipping to a front desk. Teaching came naturally to Tabitha. She'd always loved learning and had often helped younger children with their studies back in Mineral Springs. The day flew by as she assessed each child's level of education and began dividing them into groups based on their abilities. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice Yates standing in the doorway during the afternoon lessons, watching as she patiently helped Samuel Cooper sound out a difficult word. His expression was unreadable as he observed her quiet encouragement, the genuine joy on her face when the boy finally pronounced extraordinary correctly. That evening, exhausted but fulfilled, Tabitha sat on the cottage porch watching the sunset. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn to see Yates coming up the path, carrying a small wooden crate. "The children couldn't stop talking about their first day," he said by way of greeting. "Even Liam Johnson, and that boy hasn't shown enthusiasm for anything except horses in his 12 years. Tabitha smiled. "They're wonderful children, eager to learn. They just needed the right teacher." He set the crate beside her chair. "These are some books from the main house. Thought they might be useful for your lessons." Tabitha opened the crate to find a collection of well-preserved volumes: history, science, literature, and mathematics texts that would fill important gaps in her teaching materials. "These are wonderful," she said, lifting out a beautifully illustrated natural history book. "Thank you. They were my mother's. She was educated back east before coming west with my father. She'd be pleased to know they're being put to good use." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything else, just ask." "You've already done more than enough, Mr. Blackburn." He shook his head. "Education matters. These children deserve every advantage we can give them." As he turned to leave, Tabitha called after him, "Will you join us sometime?" The children would benefit from hearing about the practical applications of what they're learning. He paused, considering. "Perhaps. Good night, Miss Norwood." "Good night, Mr. Blackburn." As she watched him walk back toward the main house, Tabitha wondered about the man who'd so unexpectedly changed her fate. There was more to Yates Blackburn than the successful rancher. Everyone saw something thoughtful and perhaps even vulnerable beneath his reserved exterior. For the first time since her father's death, she felt a flutter of curiosity about the future and what it might hold. The days fell into a rhythm at the Diamond Bee. Tabitha rose with the sun, took breakfast in the cookhouse, taught until mid-afternoon, and spent her evenings preparing lessons or reading from Yates's mother's collection. The children made steady progress, their initial shyness giving way to eager participation, and, occasionally, the good-natured mischief that was inevitable with 12 youngsters gathered together. 2 weeks into her stay, an autumn storm swept across the territory, bringing desperately needed rain but turning the ranch into a sea of mud. Tabitha awoke to the sound of water dripping from the cottage roof inside. She placed buckets to catch the worst leaks and hurried to the schoolhouse to discover similar conditions there. She was moving desks away from a particularly bad leak when the door opened, revealing Yates, rainwater streaming from his oilskin coat. "Classes are canceled today," he announced. "Too dangerous with the creek rising. I've sent word to the families." "Good. I was worried about the little ones trying to cross that creek." Tabitha stepped back as another drop fell from the ceiling, "Though we clearly have other problems." Yates looked up at the leaking roof, his expression darkening. "Damn it, I told Cooper to check all the roofs before the rainy season." He removed his hat, shaking off the water. "Come on, no sense staying here getting wet." They made a dash back to the main house, the rain pelting them despite the short distance. By the time they reached the covered porch, Tabitha's dress was soaked through and her hair had escaped its pins to cling damply to her neck. Mrs. Caldwell clucked disapprovingly when they entered. "Miss Norwood, you're drenched. Come, I'll find you something dry to wear while we hang your things by the fire." 20 minutes later, dressed in a borrowed skirt and blouse that were slightly too large, Tabitha joined Yates in his study. The room reflected its owner, practical but comfortable, with a large desk covered in maps and ledgers, bookshelves lining the walls, and a worn leather chair beside the fireplace. "Your cottage roof?" he asked as she entered. "Leaking in 3 places, but I've put buckets down." He frowned. "You'll stay here tonight. I'll have Cooper fix both roofs as soon as the rain lets up." "That's not necessary. I can manage. It is necessary," he interrupted firmly. "I won't have you catching pneumonia because of neglected maintenance. Mrs. Caldwell will prepare a guest room." The vehemence in his voice surprised her, and she found herself nodding in agreement rather than arguing further. "Thank you," she said simply. Yates's expression softened. "You should be properly settled by now. I apologize for the oversight." "Mr. Blackburn, you've given me employment, housing, and purpose when I had none. A few roof leaks hardly negate that." He studied her for a moment, then gestured to the chair opposite his. "Since we're both trapped indoors, perhaps you'd tell me how the teaching is progressing." For the next hour, they discussed the children's education. Tabitha found herself increasingly impressed by Yates's knowledge and genuine interest. He asked insightful questions about each child's progress, offered suggestions for practical lessons that would complement ranch life, and showed particular concern for those who were struggling. "Hannah Green has a remarkable mind for mathematics," Tabitha noted. "She solved problems yesterday that I didn't encounter until I was several years older. Her father is the same way. Man can calculate dosages in his head faster than most could with paper and pencil." Yates leaned back in his chair. "And young Diego, bright but restless. He needs challenges to keep him engaged. Like his father," Yates said with a small smile. "Miguel was the same way when we first started working together, couldn't stand still but brilliant with the cattle." The conversation shifted to books they'd both read, then to Tabitha's childhood in Mineral Springs, and finally to Yates's early days building the ranch. It was the longest conversation they'd had, and Tabitha found herself increasingly drawn to the thoughtful man beneath the rancher's exterior. "My father believed this land had potential others couldn't see," Yates explained as the rain continued to drum against the windows. "He died when I was 20, but I was determined to prove him right." "You certainly have," Tabitha said softly. "He would be proud." Something vulnerable flickered across Yates's face. "Perhaps we didn't part on the best terms." Before she could ask what he meant, Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway. "Supper's ready. I've set places in the dining room." The meal was simple but hearty: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. They ate at a large oak table that could easily seat 20, though only the two of them occupied it now. Mrs. Caldwell served them before retiring to her own quarters, leaving them in a comfortable silence punctuated only by the occasional rumble of thunder. "Tell me about your father," Yates said after they'd finished eating. "I knew him as a businessman, but not much more." Tabitha traced the rim of her water glass, memories both sweet and painful rising to the surface. "He was kind, always fair with everyone, even those who didn't deserve it. After my mother died, he tried so hard to fill both roles." She swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "He taught me to read when I was 4, sitting me on his knee in the store between customers. Said a person who could read was never truly alone. A wise man. He was." She looked up, meeting Yates's gaze. "He spoke highly of you. Said you were one of the few men whose handshake was as good as a written contract." Something like pleasure flickered in Yates's eyes. "That's high praise coming from Thomas Norwood." "It was." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why did you really offer me this position? The truth, please." Yates was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Your father helped me once, years ago, when no one else would. I just started the ranch and needed supplies on credit after a harsh winter killed half my herd. Every other merchant in town refused, but your father gave me what I needed and told me to pay when I could." He met her gaze directly. "I never forgot that kindness. When I heard how the town was treating you, it seemed right to return the favor." "So it was a debt repaid," she said softly, unsure why the answer disappointed her. "It started that way," he admitted. "But I've seen enough now to know I made the right decision regardless. You belong here, Miss Norwood. The children adore you, and you've brought something to this ranch it was missing." "And what's that?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Grace." The word hung between them, simple yet profound. Tabitha felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. The storm raged through the night, the wind howling around the eaves of the main house. Tabitha lay awake in the guest room, listening to the rain and thinking about Yates Blackburn. There was something compelling about him, a strength tempered by unexpected gentleness, a mind both practical and thoughtful. She'd begun to look forward to their brief daily interactions, finding herself watching for him around the ranch. Such thoughts were dangerous, she knew. He was her employer, and her position at the Diamond Bee depended on maintaining proper boundaries. Yet as she finally drifted to sleep, it was Yates's face she saw, the rare smile that transformed his features, the intensity in his eyes when he spoke of things that mattered to him. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world and a brilliant blue sky. Tabitha stood on the porch of the main house, breathing in the fresh air, when she spotted Yates and several men examining the schoolhouse roof. As promised, repairs began immediately. By afternoon, both the schoolhouse and cottage roofs had been mended, with Frederick Cooper personally overseeing the work to ensure it was done properly. When Tabitha returned to her cottage, she found not only a dry ceiling but also fresh flowers on the table, and the fireplace already lit against the evening chill, small touches that spoke of care beyond mere duty. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I came here with nothing, expecting nothing. Yet each day brings new purpose, new connections. Perhaps there is more worth in starting over than I realized." Classes resumed the next day, with the children full of stories about the storm. Tabitha channeled their excitement into lessons, having them write compositions about the rain, calculate the water volume that had fallen, and study the effects of weather on agriculture. She was in the middle of a geography lesson when she noticed Yates standing in the doorway again, this time with clear purpose rather than just observing. "Mr. Blackburn has offered to speak with you about the practical applications of map reading," she told the class, gesturing him forward. "As a rancher, he uses these skills every day." For the next hour, Yates captivated the children with stories of how maps and compass readings had saved his life during cattle drives, how understanding geography helped him select the best grazing lands, and how weather patterns moved across the territory. He was a natural teacher, patient with their questions and skilled at explaining complex concepts in terms they could understand. "You missed your calling," Tabitha told him afterward as the children filed out for their midday meal. "You should teach more often." "I leave that to the experts," he replied, but she could tell he was pleased. "Though I admit it was more enjoyable than I expected. They responded to you, especially the older boys. Having a man they respect show interest in education matters enormously." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "I could come once a week, perhaps. Show them different skills, tracking, basic carpentry, things that connect their book learning to daily life." "I'd like that," Tabitha said, realizing she meant it in ways that went beyond educational value. As October gave way to November, Tabitha's position at the Diamond Bee felt increasingly secure. The children were thriving under her instruction, the ranch hands and their wives had accepted her as part of the community, and her cottage truly felt like home. She'd even started a small garden behind it, planting winter vegetables with seeds Mrs. Caldwell had given her. Yates kept his promise, coming to the schoolhouse weekly to share practical knowledge. Their professional relationship gradually evolved into a friendship, marked by conversations that stretched longer each time, shared meals, and books exchanged with handwritten notes in the margins. One crisp November afternoon, Tabitha was teaching the children about the constellations when Yates appeared in the doorway with a large wooden crate. "Special delivery," he announced, setting the crate on her desk. The children gathered around, buzzing with curiosity as Tabitha opened it to reveal a brass telescope. "For our astronomy lessons," Yates explained. "Thought the children might enjoy seeing what they're learning about." "It's magnificent," Tabitha breathed, running her fingers over the polished brass. "Where did you find it?" "Tucson. Had it ordered months ago for the ranch, but I think it'll serve a better purpose here." That evening, well after sunset, Yates helped Tabitha set up the telescope outside the schoolhouse. The children had been allowed to stay up late for this special occasion, bundled in blankets against the night chill, their faces turned expectantly toward the star-filled sky. There, Yates said softly, adjusting the telescope. Look now. Tabitha bent to peer through the eyepiece, gasping as the moon came into sharp focus, its craters and mountains suddenly visible in breathtaking detail. It's incredible, she whispered. Your turn, Lucy, Yates called, and the little girl stepped forward eagerly, one by one. The children took their turns, exclaiming in wonder as Yates and Tabitha showed them planets, star clusters, and constellations they'd been studying on paper. The night was filled with questions, laughter, and the pure joy of discovery. As the evening progressed, the youngest children began to drift off against their parents' shoulders. Eventually, only a few of the older students remained with Tabitha and Yates, hunting for the constellations they'd recently learned. There's Cassiopeia, Hannah Green announced triumphantly, pointing to a distinctive W-shaped pattern of stars. Well spotted, Tabitha praised. And who can find the North Star? Diego's hand shot up. I can follow the edge of the Big Dipper's cup. As the last families departed, Tabitha and Yates remained, still captivated by the celestial display above them. The night had grown colder, and Tabitha pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Without a word, Yates removed his jacket and draped it over her, his hands lingering briefly on her shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so considerate, that Tabitha felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Thank you for this, she said, gesturing to the telescope. I've never seen the children so excited about learning. I remember the first time I saw the stars through a telescope, Yates replied, his voice soft in the darkness. I was 14, visiting a cousin in St. Louis. It changed how I thought about the world, knowing there was so much more than what we can see with our naked eyes. He looked down at her, his face half illuminated by moonlight. You've done that for the children here, shown them possibilities they couldn't see before. Something in his tone made Tabitha's heart beat faster. They stood close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell the subtle scent of leather and soap that she'd come to associate with his presence. We should put this away before the dew settles on it, Yates said after a moment, breaking the spell. Together they carefully packed up the telescope and carried it back to the schoolhouse. At the doorway to her cottage, Yates paused. There's to be a harvest celebration in 2 weeks, he said. A tradition at the Diamond B, music, dancing, food, the whole ranch comes together. It sounds wonderful, would you? He cleared his throat. Would you save a dance for me? Tabitha looked up at him, at the unexpected uncertainty in his expression. This man who commanded a vast ranch, who made decisions affecting dozens of lives daily, was asking for a dance as hesitantly as a schoolboy. I'd be honored, she said softly. His smile, rare and transformative, appeared briefly in the moonlight. Good night, Tabitha. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his deep voice followed her into her dreams that night. The harvest celebration was the most anticipated event of the year at Diamond B. For days beforehand, the entire ranch buzzed with preparations, men constructing tables, and a dance floor in the large barn, women cooking and baking, children making decorations from dried corn husks and autumn leaves. Tabitha threw herself into the preparations, helping Mrs. Caldwell organize the feast and assisting the children with their decorations. The schoolhouse temporarily became a workshop for creating paper lanterns and garlands, lessons giving way to the more immediate excitement of the celebration. The night before the event, a wagon arrived from town carrying supplies and unexpected visitors. Tabitha was helping hang lanterns in the barn when she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. Quite the setup you have here, Blackburn. She turned to see Judge Wilson and Mayor Hutchins from Mineral Springs, along with several other townspeople she recognized. Among them were the Blackwell brothers, whose dispute with her father had ended his life. Yates stood with the men, his expression neutral but his posture tense. We're preparing for our harvest celebration, he said evenly. What brings you gentlemen to the Diamond B business proposition? The elder Blackwell brother, Victor, replied. Heard you might be interested in expanding your operation. We've got land for sale that would connect your north pasture to the river." Tabitha stepped back into the shadows, not wanting to be seen. These men had dismissed her as worthless, had spoken of her as a burden to be rid of. And the Blackwells. She couldn't bear to look at the men whose actions had orphaned her. She slipped out the back of the barn and hurried to her cottage, her heart pounding. The safe world she'd built at the Diamond Bee suddenly felt precarious, threatened by these unwelcome reminders of all she'd lost. A knock on her door an hour later revealed Yates, his expression troubled. "You heard," he said simply. Tabitha nodded. "Why are they here? Business, supposedly?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "The Blackwells own land I've been interested in for years, never thought they'd sell, and now they are. Yes, at a reasonable price, surprisingly." His eyes searched her face. "I didn't invite them to stay for the celebration, but Hutchins invited himself and the others. Said they'd head back to town tomorrow afternoon." Tabitha turned away, moving to stare out the window at the darkening ranch yard. "I understand if you need to make this deal. The land is important to the ranch. Tabitha." His voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She turned reluctantly, meeting his gaze. "I won't make any deal that causes you pain," he said simply. "The land can wait. There are other parcels, other opportunities." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by a wave of guilt. "It's your livelihood. I have no right to stand in the way of what's best for the Diamond Bee." Yates stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to maintain eye contact. "You are what's best for the Diamond Bee." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that went far beyond her role as the ranch's schoolteacher. For a heartbeat, Tabitha thought he might reach for her, might close the small distance that separated them. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Will you still come tomorrow?" "To the celebration," she hesitated only briefly. "Yes, this is my home now, I won't hide," pride flickered in his eyes. "Good, I'll see you tomorrow then." The following evening, Tabitha dressed with particular care in her best dress, a deep blue calico with lace at the collar and cuffs, preserved from her life before. She pinned her hair up, securing it with her mother's tortoiseshell combs, and fastened the silver locket around her neck. The barn had been transformed into a wonderland of golden lantern light and autumn decorations. Tables groaned under the weight of food, a small band of ranch hands tuned their instruments in one corner, and children darted excitedly between adults. The entire Diamond Bee community was there, along with the visitors from town. Tabitha entered quietly, hoping not to draw attention, but the children spotted her immediately. "Miss Norwood," Lucy called, running to take her hand. "Come see the decorations we hung." Before she could respond, she found herself pulled into the celebration, surrounded by familiar faces offering greetings and compliments. The warmth of their welcome fortified her, reminding her that she had indeed found a place here. She was speaking with Mrs. Santiago when she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. Turning, she found Judge Wilson staring at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that might have been shame. "Miss Norwood," he said, approaching cautiously, "you look, well, thank you, Judge Wilson." "I am well." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Finally, he cleared his throat. "The children speak highly of you. It seems you've found your calling here." "Yes," she replied simply, unwilling to make this easier for him. "I may have been hasty in my assessment of your situation," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "It appears Mr. Blackburn saw something the rest of us missed." Before Tabitha could respond, the band struck up a lively tune. Children rushed to the dance floor, pulling adults along with them. In the commotion, Judge Wilson nodded awkwardly and moved away. Tabitha watched the dancing, content to observe for the moment. She spotted Yates across the room, deep in conversation with Miguel. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the crowded barn. With a brief word to his foreman, he began making his way toward her. He was halfway there when Victor Blackwell intercepted him. a drink in one hand and an insincere smile on his face. Tabitha couldn't hear their conversation over the music, but she could see the tension in Yates's jaw as he responded to whatever Blackwell was saying. The music changed to a slower waltz. Couples moved onto the floor, and Tabitha felt a momentary disappointment as Yates remained trapped in conversation with Blackwell. Then a voice spoke beside her. "Miss Norwood, would you honor me with this dance?" She turned to find Dr. Green beside her, his kind face creased in a smile. "I'd be delighted," she replied, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. As they danced, Tabitha caught glimpses of Yates, still engaged with Blackwell but watching her now, his expression unreadable. The song ended, and before she could return to her seat, another ranch hand asked for a dance. Then another. She found herself passed from partner to partner, each man treating her with a respect that felt like a deliberate statement to the visitors from town. Finally, as another waltz began, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found Yates standing there, hand extended. "I believe you promised me a dance," he said quietly. His hand was warm around hers as he led her to the center of the floor. When he placed his other hand at her waist, she felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with the watching eyes around them. "I'm sorry it took so long," he said as they began to move with the music. "Blackwell is persistent. What does he want? To sell his land, to curry favor, to remind everyone of his importance?" Yates's lips quirked in a half-smile, "But I didn't ask you to dance to talk about Victor Blackwell." "Why did you ask me to dance?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Yates looked down at her, his gaze softening. "Because since the moment you stepped into that town meeting with your head held high, despite everything you'd lost, I haven't been able to look away." The honesty in his voice took her breath away. They moved together through the waltz, their steps perfectly matched, as if they'd been dancing together for years rather than minutes. "The night you came to the Diamond Bee," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I told myself I was repaying a debt to your father, but that wasn't the whole truth." "What was the truth?" Tabitha asked, her heart beating faster. "That I'd watched you grow up from a distance. That I'd admired your intelligence, your kindness, your quiet strength. That when those fools in town said you had no worth, something in me couldn't bear it." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Because I'd always seen your worth, Tabitha, long before I brought you here." The music swelled around them, but Tabitha barely heard it. All she could focus on was Yates's face, the emotion in his eyes, and the way her name sounded when he spoke it. "I have nothing to offer you," she whispered. "No dowry, no family connections, nothing but myself." "That," he said with unexpected fierceness, "is everything." The music ended, but they remained still, locked in the moment. Around them, couples separated, new partners were chosen, but Yates kept his hand at her waist, reluctant to break the connection between them. A commotion at the barn entrance broke the spell. They turned to see one of the ranch hands, breathless and disheveled, shouting for Yates. "Fire at the north pasture, boss, lightning strike." The celebration dissolved into organized chaos as the men of the Diamond Bee rushed to respond to the threat. Wildfires were among the most feared disasters on a cattle ranch, capable of destroying grazing land and threatening livestock. "Stay here," Yates told Tabitha, already moving toward the door. "We'll handle this." But as the women gathered the children and the band packed away their instruments, Tabitha found she couldn't just wait idly. She approached Mrs. Caldwell, who was already organizing supplies. "How can I help?" The older woman assessed her briefly, then nodded. "The men will need water, food. They might be fighting this all night if the wind's against them." For the next several hours, Tabitha worked alongside the women of the ranch, preparing supplies and coordinating efforts to support the firefighters. Judge Wilson and Mayor Hutchins awkwardly offered their assistance, seemingly eager to prove themselves useful in the crisis. Even the Blackwell brothers joined the bucket brigade when the fire threatened to jump the creek near the main buildings. It was past midnight when Yates returned, his face streaked with soot, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. The fire was contained, he reported, though men would remain on watch through the night to ensure it didn't flare up again. Most of the visitors from town had departed once the immediate danger passed, but Judge Wilson remained, speaking quietly with Yates near the cookhouse. Tabitha, distributing coffee to the returning men, couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw the judge nod solemnly before shaking Yates's hand with what appeared to be newfound respect. As the ranch slowly settled back into quiet, Tabitha found herself on the porch of her cottage, too wired from the evening's events to sleep. She sat watching the distant glow of the smoldering fire, wondering what might have happened if the music hadn't ended when it did, if Yates had finished what he seemed about to say. Footsteps on the path made her look up. Yates approached, his face freshly washed but his clothes still bearing the evidence of the night's battle. "You should be resting," she said as he reached the porch steps. "So should you." He remained standing, hands in his pockets, looking up at her. "Judge Wilson had some interesting things to say tonight." "Oh," he admitted they were wrong about you. "Said watching you tonight how everyone here respects you, how you immediately stepped up to help made him realize what an injustice the town did." Tabitha absorbed this, surprised by how little satisfaction it brought her. "It doesn't matter anymore, my life is here now." "Is it?" Yates asked, the question carrying weight beyond its simple words. "Is this where you want to stay, Tabitha, at the Diamond B?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "It's become home." He climbed the steps slowly, coming to stand before her. "And if I were to ask you to stay not just as our teacher but as something more, what would you say then?" Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward. "What are you asking, Yates?" He took her hands in his thumbs brushing across her knuckles. "I'm asking if you could see yourself as mistress of the Diamond B, as my wife." The directness of the proposal, so like him, made her breath catch. "We've known each other such a short time. I've known you most of your life," he interrupted gently. "And you've shown me more of your character in these few months than most people reveal in years." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that gleamed in the moonlight. "This was my mother's. I've kept it, waiting for the right woman to give it to." The ring was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Tabitha stared at it, overwhelmed by the moment's significance. "I don't need an answer tonight," Yates said, correctly interpreting her silence. "Take time to think, but know that when I said you're worth more than all my land, I meant it. The Diamond B means everything to me except when compared to you." He placed the ring in her palm, closing her fingers gently around it. "Whatever you decide, it's yours. A reminder that your worth isn't measured by what others say, but by the lives you touch and the heart you've captured." With that, he leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Tabitha." As he walked away toward the main house, Tabitha opened her hand to look at the ring, its pearl glowing softly in the moonlight. From worthless to priceless in the span of a few months, the journey seemed impossible. Yet here she stood. She slept that night with the ring beside her pillow, her dreams filled with possibility. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the air still smelling faintly of smoke from the contained fire. Tabitha rose early, the ring clutched in her palm as she considered Yates's proposal. Marriage was not a decision to be made lightly, especially to a man who commanded such a significant operation as the Diamond B. Being his wife would mean responsibilities far beyond teaching school. It would mean partnering with him in all aspects of ranch life. Yet when she tried to imagine refusing, returning to the simpler relationship of teacher and employer, her heart protested painfully. She dressed and walked to the main house, hoping to find him before the day's activities scattered everyone to their tasks. Mrs. Caldwell directed her to Yates's study, where she found him reviewing damage reports from the fire. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral, though she could see the question in his eyes. "Good morning," she said, suddenly nervous despite her resolve. "Good morning." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly." She smiled slightly. I had rather a lot to think about, he nodded, waiting for her to continue, not pressuring her either way. Tabitha moved closer to his desk, her hand closed around the ring. Before I give you my answer, I need to ask something. Anything. The Blackwell land. How important is it to the ranch? Surprise flickered across his face. It would give us water access we currently lack, make the north pasture more viable for year-round grazing. And they're still willing to sell. Yes, we discussed terms last night before the fire. Tabitha took a deep breath. Then you should buy it. Yates stood slowly. You know who they are, what they did to your father. I do, and I'll never forgive them for that. She met his gaze steadily. But I won't let them take anything else from me, not your land, not our future. Our future, he repeated, hope beginning to replace the caution in his eyes. Tabitha opened her palm, revealing the ring. Yes, if the offer still stands. Yates moved around the desk until he stood directly before her. It stands. It will always stand. He took the ring from her palm. May I? She nodded, extending her left hand. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the weight of the moment, not just the commitment they were making to each other, but the final closing of one chapter of her life and the opening of another. I love you, Tabitha Norwood, Yates said, his voice roughened with emotion. Not for what you can do or what you bring to the Diamond Bee, but for who you are, your strength, your kindness, your heart. And I love you, Yates Blackburn, she replied, the words feeling both new and familiar on her tongue. For seeing worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. For offering me not charity but partnership. He drew her close then, one hand at her waist, the other cradling her cheek. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that left her breathless. It was a promise, a beginning and a homecoming all at once. A discreet cough from the doorway eventually separated them. Mrs. Caldwell stood there, trying and failing to hide her smile. I take it congratulations are in order, she asked, her eyes twinkling. Yates kept his arm around Tabitha's waist. They are. Miss Norwood has agreed to become Mrs. Blackburn. The news spread through the Diamond Bee like wildfire, far more welcome than the actual fire they'd battled the night before. Children squealed with delight when they learned their teacher would be staying permanently. Ranch hands offered hearty congratulations. Miguel's wife wept happy tears and immediately began discussing wedding preparations. By evening, the couple found themselves at the center of an impromptu celebration in the cookhouse, complete with Mrs. Caldwell's best pie and a hastily arranged musical performance by the ranch hands who had played at the Harvest Festival. To the future Mrs. Blackburn, Dr. Green toasted, raising his glass. Who proved that worth isn't measured in dollars or deeds but in character and courage. And to the boss, added Miguel with a grin, who finally showed some sense and asked her before someone else did. Laughter and cheers filled the room. As Yates pulled Tabitha close for a dance to the ranch hands' fiddle music, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short months. From a woman deemed worthless by her community to the future mistress of the Diamond Bee, it seemed like something from a storybook rather than her real life. What are you thinking? Yates asked softly as they swayed to the music. That this feels like a dream, she admitted. A wonderful dream I'm afraid to wake from. He tightened his arm around her waist. Not a dream, a new beginning. Looking up into his face, this man who had seen her worth when others hadn't, who had offered her not just shelter but a future filled with purpose and love, Tabitha felt the last remnants of doubt fade away. Whatever challenges they might face, they would face together. The Diamond Bee would be theirs to build, to nurture, to pass on to future generations. A new beginning, she agreed, rising on tiptoes to brush her lips against his, heedless of the watching eyes and good-natured cheers around them. One I never expected but wouldn't trade for anything in the world. In the months that followed, life at the Diamond Bee settled into a new rhythm. Tabitha continued teaching while also learning the intricacies of running the ranch alongside Yates. The Blackwell land transaction was completed. expanding the Diamond B's northern boundary to the river, a business decision that Tabitha supported despite her personal feelings toward the sellers. They were married on Christmas Day, 1875, in a ceremony that combined elegance with frontier practicality. The ranch hands and their families filled the newly expanded schoolhouse, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Judge Wilson made the journey from Mineral Springs to perform the ceremony, a gesture of reconciliation that Tabitha accepted with gracious dignity. As Yates slipped a gold band next to her pearl engagement ring and promised to love her all the days of his life, Tabitha felt the final piece of her heart heal. The grief of her father's death would never fully disappear, but it had been transformed into something she could carry without being broken by its weight. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilson declared. "Mr. Blackburn, you may kiss your bride." Yates cupped her face in his hands as if she were something infinitely precious. "My wife," he whispered, just for her ears, before claiming her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of devotion. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing under stars that seemed to shine especially bright for the occasion. As midnight approached, Yates led Tabitha away from the festivities toward the main house, their house, now, where they would begin their life together as husband and wife. Spring came early to the Diamond B in 1876. The range turned green with new grass. Calves wobbled alongside their mothers, and flowers bloomed in the garden Tabitha had expanded behind what was now their home. She had moved her possessions from the cottage, which would eventually house a new teacher for the growing number of children on the ranch. One evening in late April, Tabitha sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Yates joined her, settling beside her and draping his arm around her shoulders. "Beautiful," he said, though he was looking at her rather than the sunset. "It is," she agreed, leaning into his embrace. "I never tire of these views." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "How were the lessons today?" "Productive. Hannah has almost completed the advanced arithmetic book you ordered. I'm not sure what we'll do when she outpaces my knowledge. Send her to university back east," Yates said matter-of-factly. "If that's what she wants, there's no reason a ranch girl can't become a mathematician." Tabitha smiled, once again struck by her husband's progressive thinking. "Her father might need convincing, leave that to me. The Diamond B should be known for more than just its cattle." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "Which reminds me, I've been thinking about our future. Oh, the Diamond B will continue growing. We'll need more hands, more families living here." He turned to face her fully. "I want to build a proper town on the ranch, not just for our workers, but as a community. With a real school building, a doctor's office for Green, maybe even a small church." Tabitha's eyes widened. "That's ambitious. We have the land, the resources, and with you by my side, we have the vision." His expression grew earnest. "Think about it, a place where people are valued for their character and contributions, not their bank accounts or family names. A community built on the principles we believe in." The idea took root in Tabitha's imagination immediately. A town of their own making where others might find the same acceptance and opportunity she had found at the Diamond B. "I love it," she said simply. "Where would we start?" "The school, I think. A proper building with room to grow. You could design it exactly as you want." He smiled at her enthusiasm. "We'll need a name for this town." "What about Worthington?" she suggested after a moment's thought. Yates raised an eyebrow. "Worthington, a reminder," she explained, "of what brought us together. Of how value isn't determined by what others say, but by what we build and who we love." He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "Worthington it is, the finest town in the Arizona Territory." As twilight deepened around them, Tabitha settled into her husband's embrace, content in the knowledge that from worthlessness, they had created something of immeasurable value, a love that would endure, a legacy that would grow, and a community where everyone could discover their own worth. 5 years later, 1881, the schoolhouse bell rang out across Worthington, signaling the end of lessons for the day. Tabitha Blackburn gathered her books as 20 children ranging from 5-year-old newcomers to teenagers preparing for university filed out of the 2-room schoolhouse that had been the first building erected in their growing community. "Don't forget your compositions are due tomorrow," she called after them. "And Lucy, please remind your father that we need those new slates by next week." At 10 years old, Lucy had grown from the shy little girl Tabitha had first taught into a confident young lady who now served as an unofficial assistant in the classroom. "Yes, Mrs. Blackburn," she called back, already racing to catch up with her friends. Tabitha smiled, watching them scatter toward homes and businesses that had sprung up around the Diamond B Ranch house. In 5 years, Worthington had grown from an idea to a thriving settlement of nearly 30 families. They had a general store, a doctor's office where Thomas Green practiced medicine 3 days a week, a small church that doubled as a community gathering place, and the crown jewel, the schoolhouse where Tabitha continued to teach, though now with an assistant teacher for the younger children. As she locked the schoolhouse door, Tabitha spotted a familiar figure approaching on horseback. Even after 5 years of marriage, the sight of Yates still made her heart beat faster. He dismounted with the easy grace of a lifetime horseman, tying his mount to the hitching post before striding toward her. "How was your day, Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked, the formality of his words belied by the warmth in his eyes. "Productive. Hannah Green has been accepted to that women's college in Massachusetts, full scholarship." Pride spread across Yates's face. "I knew she could do it. First Worthington graduate to go to university. But not the last," Tabitha predicted. "Diego Santiago is showing similar promise." Yates offered his arm and they began walking toward home, the same house where he had lived as a bachelor, now transformed by Tabitha's touch into a true family home. "The cattle drive reached Tucson safely," he informed her. "Miguel sent a telegram. They got top dollar, even better than we hoped." "That's wonderful news. The new school books can be ordered then." "Already done. And I spoke to the builder about adding the 3rd classroom you've been wanting." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, enjoying the spring afternoon and the sight of their community going about its daily business. Neighbors called greetings as they passed. Children played in the central green space that served as a park. A wagon loaded with supplies for the general store rolled by, the driver tipping his hat respectfully. "I received a letter today," Tabitha said as they neared their home. "From Mineral Springs." Yates glanced at her, curious. "Oh, Judge Wilson is retiring. The town council is renaming the courthouse in his honor." She hesitated. "They've invited us to the ceremony." "Do you want to go?" Tabitha considered the question carefully. In 5 years, she had returned to Mineral Springs only once for the funeral of Mrs. Porter, who had, ironically, become one of her most ardent supporters after seeing Tabitha's success at the Diamond B. "I think I do," she decided. "Not for their approval, but to close that chapter completely." Yates nodded. "Then we'll go, the whole family." The whole family now included their 3-year-old son, Thomas, named for Tabitha's father, and their 1-year-old daughter, Eleanor, named for Yates's mother. As if summoned by the thought, the front door of their home opened, and Mrs. Caldwell appeared with Thomas riding on her hip and Eleanor toddling beside her, holding her hand. "Mama, Papa," Thomas shouted, wriggling to be set down. He ran to them, his dark curls so like Yates's bouncing with each step. Yates scooped him up, tossing him high enough to make the boy squeal with delight before setting him on his shoulders. Tabitha knelt to catch Eleanor, who was still mastering the art of walking on uneven ground, her chubby legs unsteady but determined. "How are my treasures today?" Tabitha asked, kissing Eleanor's rosy cheek. "Miss Eleanor helped me make biscuits," Mrs. Caldwell reported with a fond smile, "and Master Thomas has been practicing his letters." "Papa, I wrote my name," Thomas announced proudly from his perch. "Did you now?" Yates's voice held genuine pride. "You'll have to show me after supper." They entered the house together, a family created not by convention or expectation, but by choice and love. Tabitha sometimes marveled at how far she had come from that terrified young woman, standing behind her father's store counter, hearing gunshots that would change her life forever. That evening, after the children were bathed and tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Tabitha found Yates on the porch, smoking his pipe and gazing at the stars, a habit he'd never abandoned since their early courtship. "They're asleep?" he asked as she settled beside him on the swing. "Finally, Thomas wanted 3 stories tonight instead of the usual 2, Yates chuckled. "He's as persistent as his mother." "I prefer to call it determination," she countered with a smile. He set his pipe aside to put his arm around her, drawing her close against the evening chill. "Do you ever think about that day in the town meeting when they said you had no worth?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not with bitterness anymore, but with a kind of gratitude." He looked down at her, eyebrow raised. "Gratitude. If they hadn't dismissed me so completely, you might never have spoken up. We might never have found each other." She laid her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes." Yates was quiet for a moment, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "When I said you were worth more than all my land," he finally said, "I had no idea how true that would prove to be. Oh, the Diamond Bee has tripled in size and value since we married. Worthington is becoming one of the most respected communities in the territory." He tilted her chin up to meet her gaze. "But none of that, not 1 acre, not 1 building compares to what you've given me, Tabitha. A family, a purpose beyond just accumulating more land or cattle, a life filled with love." Even after 5 years, his words could still make her blush. "I feel the same way. Everything I am, everything we've built together, it all started because you saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself." "I just saw the truth," he said simply. "The rest you did on your own." They sat together as night deepened around them, the lights of Worthington twinkling in the distance. From her father's small general store to this, a community built on the principles of respect, opportunity, and genuine worth. It was more than Tabitha could have imagined that day when she stood alone at her father's grave, hearing whispers that she had nothing to offer the world. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked. Noticing her contemplative silence, she smiled, leaning up to press a kiss to the corner of his mouth. "That they were wrong, that you were right, and that I'm grateful every day for both facts." He turned his head to capture her lips properly, the kiss deepening with a passion that had only grown stronger with the passing years. When they finally separated, breathless, Yates stood and offered her his hand. "Come to bed, Mrs. Blackburn," he said, his voice husky with desire. "Let me show you exactly how priceless you are to me." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, leaving the porch swing gently rocking in the starlight, a small movement that somehow seemed to echo the profound truth they had discovered together. That true worth isn't assigned by others but revealed through love, built through actions, and measured not in land or gold, but in the lives touched and the legacy created. And by any measure, what Yates and Tabitha Blackburn had built together was beyond price.